Hello and welcome to the home of the Ghost Owl. So we're now continuing looking at Warhammer The Old World, looking at the main rulebook and looking at part 2 where we've already looked at a few of the scenarios. We've looked about how to set up the battle, how to set the tabletop. We're now going to look at the remaining pitched battle scenarios and the campaign scenarios. So the next pitched battle scenario is the Drakvald Forest Incident. Now this is a meeting engagement. Terrain setup is as normal, and deployment, the winner of the roll-off chooses who goes first and which deployment zone they want. Before deploying, each player rolls a d6 for every unit in his army, including each character and war machine, and on a roll of a 1, it must be held in reserve. Players then deploy as normal, using the alternating method. First turn, winner of the roll-off goes first, and the player who finished deploying first gains +1 to the roll. Now the game length, the game will last for 6 turns, or until one player concedes, or to an agreed time limit. Now scenario special rules, reserves. So reserves are not deployed during the start of the battle. However, the controlling player can choose any turn other than the first one to enter the battlefield. They must enter from the long edge in the player's deployment zone using the normal reinforcement rules. Now, victory is as normal, and you then have historical recreation. So historical recreation is Empire Reichland versus Empire Talabheland. The Reichland army should include a witch hunter, a unit of greatswords, an Empire general, an Empire captain, and a unit of flagellants. The Talabheland army should be led by an Empire captain. Both armies should be mainly made of state troops and can include war machines. Neither army, however, should include knights or wizards, and units arriving from reserve that are in close or open order should be arrayed in marching column. So this is an interesting scenario, one which kind of forces players to think about not necessarily following through with their plan because you don't know what's going to be in reserve. And those that are coming in from reserve are in that marching column as well. So again, the historical recreation, Empire versus Empire, absolutely fine. You can change those. As a scenario, not a bad one. Not a bad one. So far, I really like the flanking one. And obviously the initial opening one are my two favourites so far. Okay, so next up is the Battle of Gizoro Pass. This is a mountain pass battle. Terrain setup is as normal. Now deployment, winner of the roll-off chooses who goes first and which deployment zone they want. The first turn, it goes to the winner of the roll-off, and the player who finished deploying first will get +1 to the roll. Now, game length will be a random. From turn 5, you roll a d6, add the turn number, and if you get a result of 10 or more, the game ends immediately. So you could finish the game at the end of turn 5 if you roll a 5 or a 6. Now, scenario special rules, bottleneck. So this is an interesting one. No units, including fleeing units, and those arriving from reserve can leave the battlefield across the long edge unless they have the ethereal or the fly special rule, because you're obviously fighting in this narrow valley. Victory is recorded as normal using victory points. So this one's quite an interesting one. It's fairly standard. You will be deploying on the short edges, so it does give you a slightly different orientation to fight in the battle, which I think is interesting. It's nice to flip things up without making too many complicated rules to make that happen. So Mountain Pass, I quite like. Historical recreation is Bretonnia versus the Empire. This is the Westerland part of the Empire. The Bretonnia army should have a high number of knights, and the men-at-arms be given heavy armour. The Empire army can include any number of veteran state troops as long as they all have the mercenaries special rule. Players may give half of their units the stubborn special rule, and both armies' generals should be mounted on a warhorse. Now, the final scenario for pitched battles is the Lonely Tower. Now, this is command and control battle, so terrain setup is normal. However, you will place a single special feature in the center of the battlefield. Now, deployment is the winner of the roll-off chooses who goes first and which deployment zone they want, and the first turn goes to the winner of the roll-off, and the player who finished deploying first gains the +1 to the roll. Now, the game length, fixed for 6 turns, random from turn 5, and you add roll a d6 and add the turn number, so you can choose either fixed or random. No special rules, and victory is as normal. However, the player that controls the special feature gains an additional bonus of 200 points on top of the normal bonus you get from the special feature. So, again, this is a nice one because this is essentially an open battle with a special feature on the battlefield where you gain an extra bonus for that special feature. I quite like that. I quite like that. Historical recreation is quite interesting as well. It's quite simple. It's Bretonia versus Orcs. However, the Bretonian army can have no knights. So it's peasants only. And the Orc army has no orcs. It's goblins only. So it's it's peasants versus goblins. Which could be a really fun recreation, though it would be interesting how many people have 2,000 plus points of peasants and goblins. Yeah, that could be that's quite a fun one. I like the special feature. I talked about that in the terrain piece. So this one, out of all of the scenarios here, for me, there's 4 really good ones that stand out for me as being pretty nice. Say the breakpoint one for me is probably the worst, just because of the bookkeeping of it. They'll say it's nice to win on something different than just victory points. Right. So next up, there are 3 campaign battles. Now, we talked about campaigns. These are things where you've got several battles over the course of a day, or a number of days or weeks and so on. And these 3 campaign battles are linked. So we're going to do the first, second, and third linked battle. Now, you don't have to do this. You can play these completely as an individual scenario. That's absolutely fine. And they work fine as an individual scenario, but these also give you the rules if you are doing them as linked battles, which is quite nice. So, first one is a surprise encounter. So this is the first linked battle. So the armies that are used in this battle will be used in the second and third linked battles. Now, due to casualties, armies will reduce in size, and therefore this battle is ideally suited to 2,000 to 3,000 points as a minimum. So, because the reason for that is you are going to be losing units. Not all of those units are going to be coming back, and therefore, by the time you get to the third battle, how many units have you got to play with, right? So you do need to make this start quite a sizable one. So your terrain setup is normal. Now, deployment is an interesting one. Now, it's a surprise encounter, so you're kind of all over the place. Now, the map is divided into 6 deployment zones. The loser of the roll-off will deploy first by placing a single non-character unit within one of the zones. The winner of the roll-off then deploys a single non-character unit in an unoccupied zone. The players continue to alternate until each player has deployed 3 non-character units and there is a single unit in each of the 6 zones. Now, you follow the same sequence. Each player may then deploy a single character with one of their deployed units. All the remaining characters and units will remain in reserve. Now, the first turn goes to the winner of the roll-off, and the player who finished deploying first gains +1 to the roll. The game length, the game will last 6 turns until one player concedes or to an agreed time limit. Now, scenario special rules. Surprise battle. A unit that wishes to declare a charge in the first turn must first pass a leadership test. Now, reserves can enter the battlefield during the compulsory moves sub-phase of any turn, including the first chosen by the controlling player. So you can bring your reserves on in the first turn, and you get to choose which turns you want to bring these guys on in. However, the reserves will enter the battlefield from any point on a table edge that is completely within one of the zones, which are chosen randomly, that the controlling player deployed in at the start of the battle. So basically you go, I'm going to bring a reserve on, you roll a d3, having identified which zone each part, each roll of the d3 equates to, and then once you've rolled, that will randomly determine which zone that your reserve will come on in, and then you place it anywhere on the table edge for that zone. So that's quite interesting. That's quite fun, I think. And then a victory will be scoring those victory points as normal. Right. So next up is the Dark Monolith. Now this is the second linked battle. So you use, if you are playing it as a linked battle as opposed to individually, you use the same army from the first battle and roll a d6 for each unit that took casualties or was removed from play. So units that suffered casualties. For each unit that lost more than 25% of its starting strength, you roll the d6. And on a roll of 1 to 3, you remove d3 models if the unit's starting strength was less than 19 to a minimum unit strength of 5. Now, you do the same for units that have a starting strength of more than 20, however you remove d6 models, however this is to a minimum unit strength of 10. Now, if you're lucky enough to roll a 4+, the unit returns at full strength, but it will have -1 to its leadership characteristic for the duration of the battle. Now, if you had a unit that was destroyed or fled off the battlefield, if you roll a 1 to 2, the unit cannot be fielded this game, and this is where you're going to start to see armies getting smaller. Now, if you roll a 3+, the unit is fielded, but only contains half its original number of models. So, destroyed units coming back going to be much smaller. Now, terrain setup is normal, but it recommends a single large hill, which is more than 12 inches at its widest point, in the center of the battlefield, with an arcane monolith or monument of glory special feature on top. Now, I do suggest if you're going for a hill that is that large, either you go for a single layer hill that's not too tall, but it's tall enough to block line of sight, or you go for a stepped hill, which is what I would probably go for, is a stepped hill. Therefore, you can get it so that it does block some line of sight, but because it's so big, the slopes don't take up too much of the tabletop where you can't physically deploy because the models fall over and stuff. So just think about, if you're going to put a hill that big on the table, actually how it's going to work and how you're going to play around it, particularly given that there's a special feature on top of it. Now, deployment. Winner of the roll-off chooses who goes first and which deployment zone they want. And the first turn, the winner of the roll-off goes first, and the player who finished deploying first gains +1 to the roll. Now, game length, it can either be fixed for 6 turns or can be random again, which is roll a d6 and add the turn number. If it's 10 or more, the game ends immediately. Scenario special rules are none. Okay, and then victory is as normal. The player controlling the special feature gains an additional bonus of 200 points on top of the normal bonus you get from controlling the special feature. So again, I actually quite like even playing these not linked. I think these could be quite fun scenarios. And again, I like the special features. So, okay, and then we've got the final one, which is the third linked battle, which is called Heroic Last Stand. Now, use the same army from the first battle and roll a d6 for each unit that took casualties or was removed from play. Now, this follows the same principles as the previous ones. I'm not going to read them all out, but essentially you're rolling, you're removing casualties, or you're not fielding units and so on. Now, in terms of terrain, it's the same terrain setup as the Dark Monolith, and you'll see. So this is literally, when you talk about sequels, this is literally the direct sequel to the Dark Monolith battle. So as we move on, you go deployment. So the winner of the second battle is the defender, and the loser is the attacker. So the winner of the second battle now is defending the special feature, essentially, that they captured by winning the second game. Now, the attacker deploys anywhere that is at least 8 inches away from the defender's models. Now, first turn, the defender will automatically take the first turn, which is pretty lucky given that the attacker could deploy 8 inches away. The game length is fixed for 6 turns or until the defender concedes or is wiped out. Scenario special rules are none. Now, victory. This is the interesting part. So if the defender lasts until round 6, they win a major victory. If the defender lasts until round 5, they win a minor victory. If the defender concedes or is wiped out before the end of rounds 3 or 4, the attacker wins a minor victory. And if the defender concedes or is wiped out before the ends of rounds 1 or 2, the attacker wins a major victory. So there you go. I really quite like these linked battles. I really want to actually give that a go outside of a more in-depth campaign. And campaigns can go really in-depth with, all sorts of things in terms of, linking units, territory control of a map, and all sorts of things. So there's actually an awful lot you can do within campaigns. But as just a linked series of 3 battles that maybe you could play over a weekend, I really quite like this. I like the way they've done it. And I like the fact that, all the scenarios we've covered, both the pitch battle and these ones, they've got some unique flavour, obviously some unique deployment zones and so on. And some unique special rules, but without being overbearing. It's going to change the game, but only to a very small amount in a lot of cases. So, I like the way they've done this. They haven't made the special rules too onerous, too game-changing. And if you want to do that, of course, that's what narrative and open play is for, if you want to do something crazy. I like the fact that in the pitch battles they give you a historical recreation scenario as well. But bear in mind, they are pretty restrictive if you're going down that path. So there you go, guys. That brings us to the end of the Warhammer battles, i.e. preparing a battle and playing those battles. We're closing in on the very end of the rulebook. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are about to move on to the laws of magic and then magic items, which will wrap up the main Warhammer rulebook before we move on to the faction focuses. I think this is going to be quite an interesting next series of videos. We're going to go through each law individually and then through each section of the magic items. So keep an eye out for those coming up. But if you liked this particular video, then give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. Let me know why in the comments down below. Also in the comments down below, let me know what you think of the scenarios and how you might be intending to play your games. If you want to see more content, though, hit the subscribe button. It's totally free for you to do. It takes a few seconds to do, and yet it's a big, big deal for me, so thank you for that in advance. You've been watching The Ghost Owl, and I'll see you all very, very soon.